The truck had 211,000 miles on it. The left side mirror had a hairline crack that James Calloway had been meaning to fix for 3 years and never did. The tailgate had a dent from 2019 when his daughter Sarah had backed it into a concrete post at a grocery store in Fort Worth and laughed so hard she had to sit down on the asphalt. He had never fixed that either. He wasn't going to. Some dents were not dents. Some dents were Tuesday afternoons in October when your daughter laughs until she cries, and the sky is that particular shade of Texas blue that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. And everything in the world is exactly where it belongs. Cars in the showroom window that caught the morning sun and threw it back at you like an argument. He could see his reflection in the nearest window. Flannel shirt, worn jeans, boots that had walked more miles than he cared to count, including some he had spent the better part of 20 years trying to forget. He turned off the engine. The truck made its usual sound when it powered down, a small shudder, a settling, like an old dog circling before it lies down. James sat with that sound for a moment. He had bought this truck in 2003 with the first real paycheck from the company he had just spent 22 years building from 2 employees and a rented office in a strip mall in Garland, Texas, into something that a private equity firm in New York had just valued at $1.8 billion. The sale had closed 4 days ago. He had driven straight from his lawyer's office to a diner on Route 30 and ordered a patty, melted a coffee, and sat alone for 2 hours reading the newspaper like nothing had happened. He was 58 years old. His hands had done things that had no place in a showroom full of luxury automobiles. He had served 12 years in the United States Army, the last 6 with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, which most people knew by a shorter name that James did not use in casual conversation. He had come home from his last deployment in 2001 with a body that worked and a head that needed time and a certainty that the only direction left was forward. He had built something. He had done it quietly, without press releases or social media, without a corner office in a glass tower, without ever once losing the sense that the work was the thing and everything else was noise. The reason he was at Riverside Premium Motors on a Wednesday morning in March was simple. His daughter Sarah was turning 33 next month, and she had been driving a Honda Civic with a check engine light she had learned to ignore and bald tires she kept promising to replace. He had offered to help 3 times, and she had refused 3 times because Sarah Calloway was her father's daughter and did not accept help she hadn't earned. But she had mentioned twice in passing. The way people mention things they want you to hear without wanting to be seen, wanting them a particular car. Silver. 4 doors. The kind of car that said I made it without screaming it. He had written down the name. He was here to buy it. He climbed out of the truck, stretched his back in the way it needed every morning now, and walked toward the entrance. The showroom smelled of new leather and something chemical that was meant to suggest luxury and mostly succeeded. The floors were polished to a mirror shine. There were 11 cars arranged with the precision of an art installation, each one lit from above like a painting in a museum. A woman at the reception desk looked up when he entered. She was in her mid-40s, dark hair, a name badge that read Rosa, and she smiled at him with the automatic courtesy of someone who had worked there long enough to mean it. "Good morning," she said. "Welcome to Riverside. How can I help you today?" He was about to answer when the young man appeared. He came from the back of the showroom with the specific energy of someone who has decided before arriving that he already knows what he's looking at. He was 29, maybe 30, with hair that had been arranged carefully, and a suit that cost more than Rosa made in a week, and the walk of someone who had been told he was exceptional so many times that he had stopped questioning it. "His name tag," said Brandon. "His title underneath," said sales manager. He took in James Calloway in 1 second. The flannel shirt, the worn jeans, the boots, the calluses visible on the hands from 20 feet away, and something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, just slightly. The professional smile stayed in place, but the interest behind it dimmed like a light on a dimmer switch. "I've got this one, Rosa," he said, without looking at her. Rosa's smile held for a moment, Then she looked down at her desk. Brandon stopped in front of James with his hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that was supposed to communicate authority, and mostly communicated that he had practiced it. "Can I help you?" he said. The question had the shape of helpfulness, and none of the substance. James looked at him for a moment. He had a gift for reading people that had been refined over years, in environments where reading someone wrong had consequences that no performance review could capture. He read Brandon in about 4 seconds, and understood what he was dealing with, and made the quiet internal decision that would shape the next 3 hours of both their lives. "I'm looking for a specific car," James said. "Silver, 4-door, the touring package, for my daughter." Brandon's eyes moved to the window where the old F-150 was visible in the parking lot. They moved back to James with the speed of someone trying to hide what they'd just done, and failing. "Of course," he said. "Do you have a budget in mind?" There it was. The question that wasn't a question. The filter dressed as a courtesy. James looked at him evenly. "I'll know when I see the car." Brandon smiled the smile. "Right, of course. Well, the touring package on that model starts at $74,000. He said it the way people say things, when they're hoping the number will do work so they don't have to. He waited. James said nothing. "Okay," Brandon said, recalibrating. "Well, let me show you what we have in stock." He began walking toward the far end of the showroom, toward the back corner where the older inventory sat. Not toward the car James had described. Not toward anything silver or new or recently delivered. James followed him and understood what was happening and said nothing and stored it. In the back corner there was a gray sedan with a higher mileage and a year on it that wasn't current and a price point that was lower, but not low enough for this to make any kind of financial sense as a sales strategy. It was theater. It was the theater of a young man who had looked at an old truck and a flannel shirt and concluded something, and was now performing that conclusion with the confidence of someone who has never been wrong enough times to know they should check their work. "This is a great option in the range you're probably looking for," Brandon said, gesturing at the car with the specific flourish of a man who was fully committed to a story he invented 30 seconds ago. James stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at the car. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Brandon. Then he said quietly, "I described a specific car. Silver. New. Touring package. That's not it." Brandon held the smile. "Sure. But given your..." He paused, the pause of someone choosing words that are still the wrong ones. "Situation. This might be more practical." The word situation landed in the room and stayed there. In the front of the showroom, Rosa had heard it from her desk. She looked up. A young sales associate named Tyler, 24 years old, 3 days into his first sales job, standing near the water dispenser pretending to look at his phone. Heard it too. He glanced toward the back of the showroom. He had been watching since the flannel shirt came through the door, because he had grown up in a house where his grandfather wore flannel shirts and drove old trucks and built things with his hands. And he recognized something in the bearing of this particular man that Brandon clearly did not. He kept his phone up and kept watching. "My situation," James said. The 2 words had no heat in them. They were simply accurate. A recording device. A notation. "I just mean," Brandon said. And then the sentence did not go anywhere useful because there was nowhere useful for it to go. "There's a man who comes in here every few months," said a voice from near the showroom entrance. It was Marcus, the security guard, a broad-shouldered man of 35 who had done 2 tours in Iraq with the 3rd Infantry Division before a shoulder injury ended his military career and deposited him here, in this building, in this uniform, watching people look at cars they were deciding whether to buy. He had said nothing up to this point. He had watched. He had the stillness of someone who has been in situations where stillness was the difference between going home and not going home. And he had recognized that same stillness in the man in the flannel shirt the moment he walked in. "He comes in driving something old," Marcus continued, his voice calm and without accusation. "Just noting something. He's never once bought something practical." Brandon turned to look at Marcus with an expression that said, "This is not your moment." Marcus met his gaze and said nothing more. James turned and looked at Marcus for a moment. Something passed between them that had no words and needed none. Two men who had stood in places where the ground moved and learned to stand anyway, recognizing each other in a showroom full of cars that cost more than either of them had earned in their first years of service, the way soldiers always recognize each other. Something in the eyes, something in the way the weight is carried. Then Brandon said the thing that ended the version of this story where it stayed small. His phone had buzzed twice while the silence was happening, and he had the impatience of someone who has somewhere more important to be, which is its own kind of tell, because truly important people are almost never in a hurry. He looked at James, and he said, and his voice had the particular tone of someone being efficient, "I think maybe we're not the right fit for what you're looking for today. I can give you the number of a Chevrolet dealership about 4 miles east. They have some great options for your budget." And then he looked at Marcus. "Could you show our guest out?" The showroom went very quiet. Rosa at the front desk put down her pen. Tyler stopped, pretending to look at his phone. Marcus did not move. James Calloway stood in the back corner of Riverside Premium Motors on a Wednesday morning in March and looked at Brandon Mercer for 3 full seconds. He had looked at harder things and harder places with less sleep and more at stake, and his face did the same thing now that it had always done in those moments. It did nothing. It held. It was the face of someone who has spent a long time making peace with the distance between how things are and how they ought to be, and who has learned that the distance itself is information. He nodded once. He walked to the front of the showroom, past Tyler, who stepped slightly aside, past Rosa, who looked at him with an expression that was an apology for something she hadn't done, and through the glass door and into the March morning. Marcus watched him go. Then he looked at Brandon. Brandon was already looking at his phone, already moving on, already categorizing what had just happened in the folder, in his mind labeled, "No sale, necessary, handled." He did not notice Marcus watching him. He did not notice that Tyler was still standing by the water dispenser with the expression of someone processing something they will not forget. He walked to the back office and closed the door. Rosa looked at the closed door for a moment. Then she looked at the parking lot, where the old F-150 was still sitting. The man in the flannel shirt was standing beside it. He was not angry. She could see that from here. He was not on his phone calling someone, not pacing, not doing any of the things people do when they've been embarrassed into electricity. He was standing with his hands on the roof of the truck looking out at the street, the way people stand when they're thinking through something that requires patience and clarity. She had worked here for 15 years, and she had seen many things in this showroom. And she had a feeling about this one that she could not have explained and did not need to. In the parking lot, James Calloway was thinking about his daughter Sarah. She had her mother's laugh, which arrived before it was expected and stayed longer than conversations usually planned for. Her mother, Carol, had died 3 years ago in the particular brutal, quiet way that cancer takes people it has decided to take. And there had been a period after that, about 14 months, when James had not been entirely sure he was still in the world in any meaningful sense. He had gone through the motions. He had shown up. He had run the company, made the decisions, reviewed the contracts, sent the emails. But there had been something missing from the interior of it. Some frequency that Carol had always generated just by being alive in the same zip code. It was Sarah who had brought him back, not through some dramatic gesture, not through a single conversation that unlocked him. She had simply continued to exist in her particular way, calling on Sunday mornings, sending him articles about things she thought he would find interesting, once driving 4 hours from Houston to Fort Worth because he had mentioned offhandedly that the furnace was making a noise and she wanted to make sure he was warm. She had sat with him in the truck in the driveway of the house for an hour, and they had talked about her mother and laughed twice and cried once, and then she had gone inside and called a furnace repair company and handled it. He had watched her do this and understood for the first time in 14 months that forward was still a direction worth traveling. He was going to buy her that car. He reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and took out his phone. He found the number he was looking for. He had not used it in almost 2 years. Not since a charity golf event in Austin where they had shared a cart for 18 holes and talked for 3 hours. About everything, except the things people at charity golf events usually talk about, which was a relief to both of them. The man's name was David Nash. Colonel David Nash, retired, who had been James Calloway's commanding officer for a period of time in the late 1990s, that neither of them discussed in specifics, and both of them carried in a particular way that the people who have never been in those rooms cannot fully understand. David Nash, who had left the Army in 2005 and spent 15 years building an automotive group that now operated 47 dealerships across 12 states. David Nash, who had sent James a bottle of scotch when the sale of Callaway Security Group closed 4 days ago with a handwritten note that said 2 words, "Well done." James had kept the note. He had put it in the drawer of his desk next to Sarah's photo and Carol's last birthday card to him, in the drawer where things went that had no category except important. He pressed call. It rang twice. "Jimmy," David said. His voice had that quality. It always had. Like everything was already taken care of, and you just needed to catch up. "What are you up to?" James looked at the building in front of him. "I'm standing in the parking lot of one of your dealerships," he said. Short pause. "Which one?" "Riverside Premium Motors. Dallas." Another pause. This one different. The length and texture of someone doing something on the other end of the line. "What happened?" James told him. He told him the way. He told everything, which was accurately, and without theater, just the sequence of events. The tour of the gray sedan. The word situation. The suggestion of a Chevrolet dealership for miles east. He told it in about 90 seconds. Then he stopped. David Nash was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and his voice had changed in the way that James had heard it change only in specific circumstances across a very long friendship, "I need you to go back inside." James looked at the building. He thought about this. "There's a car I want to buy," he said. "Yes, there is," David said, "and I'm going to make a call. And then you're going to go back in and you're going to buy it, and I need you to let me handle the rest." James was quiet for a moment. "David." "I know," David said. "I know what you're going to say. You're going to say you don't need anyone to fight your battles." James didn't say anything, which was the same as confirming. "This isn't about your battle," David said. His voice was steady and certain in the way it had been on certain nights in certain places, when certainty was the only thing holding the shape of the situation. "This is about mine, about what kind of business I'm running and what kind of people I have running it. You gave me the information. Let me do my job." A long pause in which James looked at the old truck and the dent from the October afternoon, when Sarah laughed, until she sat down on the asphalt and the sky was that particular shade of Texas blue. "All right," he said. "Go back inside," David said. "I'll call you in 10 minutes. James put the phone in his pocket. He looked at the entrance to Riverside Premium Motors for a moment. Then he walked back in. Rosa looked up when the door opened, and her expression did something that she didn't have time to arrange. A small involuntary opening. Something between surprise and relief. She opened her mouth. James spoke first. He spoke quietly so that his voice would not carry past the reception desk. "The young man who showed me out. Is that the sales manager?" Rosa looked at him. "Yes," she said. "His name is Brandon. He's been here 8 months. 8 months, James said. Rosa nodded, then, and she wasn't sure why she was saying it. She said, "He's not all of us." James looked at her for a moment. He had the quality of someone who actually hears what people say, which is rarer than it should be. "No," he said. "I can see that." Tyler was still near the water dispenser. He had not moved and had no intention of moving until he understood how this ended. He had been raised by a grandfather who told him once that the most important thing you can do when you're young is watch what happens when someone treats a person as less than they are. Because the universe has a long memory and a short tolerance. And you want to be standing in the right place when the accounting comes. He was standing in what he believed was the right place, and he was watching. Marcus, at his post near the door, had watched James walk back in. He had not said anything. He had nodded. A small, precise nod. The kind that carries weight in proportion to its size. It was 11 minutes later that Brandon's office door opened. He came out with his phone in his hand and an expression that Tyler would describe later to his roommate as the face of a man who has been told something in a tone of voice he had never heard directed at him before. His color was slightly different, not pale, exactly, but the particular shade of someone whose body has just processed information that contradicts its entire model of a situation. He stopped in the middle of the showroom floor. He looked at James, who was standing near the reception desk looking at nothing in particular, with the patience of someone who has waited in considerably more difficult circumstances. Brandon walked toward him. He walked with the careful deliberateness of someone who is trying to reassemble their professional posture while still operating under what felt like a controlled falling sensation. He stopped a few feet away. His hands were at his sides. The phone was still in one of them. "Mr. Calloway," he said. His voice was different. The management frequency had left it. What was underneath was younger and less certain and more honest. "I owe you an apology." James looked at him. "The way I spoke to you earlier," Brandon continued, and he stopped and started again, which was the most real thing he had done since James walked in. "It was unprofessional, and it was wrong. I made assumptions that I had no basis for making, and I treated you in a way that doesn't reflect how this business should operate or how I want to conduct myself." He paused. "I'm sorry." The showroom was quiet. Rosa was looking at her desk, and not looking at her desk. Tyler had completely abandoned the pretense of the phone. Marcus, by the door, was still. James looked at Brandon for a long moment. He was not thinking about himself. He was thinking about Rosa, who had said he's not all of us, with the particular weariness of someone who has watched this happen before and absorbed the second-hand embarrassment of it many times. He was thinking about Tyler, 24 years old, first week on the job, taking notes whether he knew it or not. He was thinking about Marcus, who had 2 tours and a bad shoulder, and a uniform that did not reflect what he had done or what he knew, and who had said something small and true at the right moment, and then held his position with a quietness that James recognized as its own form of courage. He was not thinking about Brandon, not primarily, because Brandon was 29 years old and had done a thing that do when no one has taught them better, or when they have been taught wrong, or when they are moving too fast through a world that has not yet handed them the specific bill for their assumptions. James had been 29 once. He had made different mistakes with different consequences, and he had been fortunate enough to have people around him who treated the correction as the important thing, not the humiliation. "Apology accepted," James said. Something moved across Brandon's face. He had been ready for more. He had been braced for it. The full accounting, the weight of it, the public version that he had been replaying in his head since David Nash's phone call ended. What he got instead was 2 words delivered without ceremony. And somehow that was harder to hold than the version he had prepared for, because it arrived with a dignity he had done nothing to earn and everything to receive. "I'd like to buy that car," James said. "The silver one, touring package. I'd like Tyler to help me with it." He said the last part without looking at Tyler. But Tyler's head came up immediately, because James had said his name, and he had not introduced himself, and James Calloway had simply known it, the way people know things when they have been paying attention the whole time. Brandon turned and looked at Tyler with an expression that was complicated in several directions. At once, "Of course," he said. "Tyler, can you take care of Mr. Calloway?" Tyler crossed the showroom floor with the walk of someone who has just been handed something they will think about for the rest of their career. He stopped in front of James and put out his hand. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I'm Tyler. I'm glad you came back in." James shook his hand. He had a good handshake, James thought. Firm and honest. The kind that hadn't been performed yet. "So am I," he said. Rosa watched them walk toward the silver car at the front of the showroom. The good one, the one lit from above, like it had been waiting specifically for this morning. She picked up her pen and then put it back down because she wasn't ready to work yet. She needed a moment. She had worked here for 15 years and she had watched a great many transactions and she had never seen one begin the way this one had and arrive here at this particular morning light on that particular car without knowing the shape of the thing until it was already finished. Marcus, by the door, watched James and Tyler reach the car and watched James put his hand on the roof of it the same way he had put his hand on the roof of the old truck in the parking lot, with the specific tenderness of someone who has been around enough machines to know that each one is its own thing and deserves a moment of attention. He watched this, and he felt something that he did not name because naming it would have required a conversation with himself that he didn't have the words for yet. Something adjacent to recognition. The feeling of watching someone be exactly who they are in a situation designed to make that difficult. His shoulder ached, the way it always ached. He shifted his weight and stood straighter and watched. What happened next took most of the morning. Tyler turned out to be very good at his job, in a way that had not yet had room to show itself. He knew the car in detail, had studied every model on the lot in his first 3 days, with the thoroughness of someone who understands that the knowledge is the foundation of everything. And he walked James through the Silva touring package with an honesty that was the best thing you could bring to a sales floor, pointing out what was exceptional about it and one minor thing that was not exceptional about it and letting James decide what mattered. James asked 3 questions that were the right 3 questions. Tyler answered them without embellishment. They sat at a desk near the window where the morning sun had moved to a different angle now, warm and specific on the tile floor. "I'm buying this for my daughter," James said at one point. "She lost her mother 3 years ago. She's been driving something that shouldn't be on the road." Tyler was writing something on the form in front of him. He stopped writing. He looked up. "I'm sorry about her mother," he said. And then he didn't say anything else, which was the exactly correct response. James looked at him. "How long have you been doing this?" "3 days, Tyler said. James smiled. It was small, and mostly in the eyes. "You're going to be fine at this," he said. Tyler looked down at the form. He was glad James wasn't looking at him directly because he was 24 years old and 3 days into his first real job, and the man across the desk from him had just said something to him with the authority of someone who had been watching the world for a very long time and had learned what to look for. When the paperwork was finished and the numbers were settled and Tyler had walked through the final details, James stood and shook his hand again. The same firm, honest handshake. Then he walked to Rosa's desk. She looked up. He put a business card on the desk in front of her. It had his name on it, and a phone number, and nothing else. "I'm going to have some time on my hands," he said. "I'd like to do something useful with it. If you ever find yourself looking for a different situation," he used the word with a precision that she caught immediately, "give me a call." Rosa looked at the card. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. It came out with more weight than she intended, and she didn't try to take any of it back. James walked to the door. He stopped when he reached Marcus. Marcus looked at him. James put out his hand. Marcus shook it. "Where did you serve?" James asked. "3rd Infantry Division," Marcus said. "2 tours." James nodded. "Good outfit." "Good." They stood for a moment in the specific silence of people who have been to the same general category of places without having been to the same specific ones. A silence that holds more than most conversations manage. "There's a job opening," James said. "Security Consulting. The company that's doing the hiring has a strong preference for people who know when to speak and when to hold position." He paused. "You did both well today." Marcus looked at him steadily. He was not surprised. Exactly. He had grown up in a neighborhood where people talked about luck, and he had spent enough years in the army to understand that what looked like luck was usually preparation meeting a moment that finally showed up. He felt this morning like one of those moments. He had a wife and a 6-year-old daughter and a shoulder that woke him up at 3 a.m. twice a week and a uniform that paid less than it should. He looked at James Calloway and understood with the certainty of someone who has learned to read information quickly that this was real, and that it was only being offered once. "I'm interested," he said. James nodded. "Tyler has my information. He'll get it to you." He pushed through the door into the March morning. The sun was higher now. The parking lot was warmer than it had been 2 hours ago. He walked to the old truck, opened the door, sat behind the wheel. He did not start the engine immediately. He sat with the silence of the truck, the way he had sat with it at the beginning of the morning, before the showroom and the gray sedan, and the suggestion of a Chevrolet dealership for miles east. He thought about David Nash and the bottle of scotch, and the note that said, "Well done." He thought about what David had said. "This is about what kind of business I'm running, and what kind of people I have running it." He had been thinking about what to do with the time that the sale had returned to him. 22 years of a company that had required everything, every hour, every decision, every version of his attention. And now, there was space where that had been. And space, in James Calloway's experience, was not something to fear. Space was what you got before the next thing showed you what it was. He thought about Rosa's face when she said, "He's not all of us." He thought about Tyler's handshake. He thought about Marcusing 2 tours in a shoulder, in the particular economy of a man who speaks only when speech adds something. He started the truck. The engine turned over with its familiar sound. Reliable and unspectacular and entirely sufficient, like most things worth depending on. He pulled out of the parking lot of Riverside Premium Motors and drove east on the highway with the sun behind him, and Dallas spreading out ahead, and the silver touring. Package being detailed and ready for delivery, and Sarah's birthday 4 weeks away, and Carol somewhere, in the quality of the light on the road. The way she always was now. Not gone. Exactly. Just changed in form. The way his father had told him once that nothing you love ever fully leaves you. It just changes where it lives. He called Sarah from the highway. She picked up on the second ring. "Dad." Her voice had the particular tone it had on weekday mornings, when she was between things, busy, but never too busy for his number. "What's up?" "I'm coming to Houston this weekend," he said. She paused. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine. I have something to give you, Dad." "You don't have to," she started. "I know I don't have to," he said. The truck's running noise filled the line for a moment. "I want to..." She was quiet for a second, the kind of quiet that means someone is feeling something they don't have the right word for yet. "What is it?" "It's something your mother would have made me buy you 3 years ago," he said. The silence on the line was longer this time. Then she said, and her voice had that thing in it that was her mother's laugh arriving before it was planned for. "How long have you been holding on to this?" "Long enough," he said. She made a sound that was the beginning of a laugh and the beginning of something else. "Dad, I'll be there Saturday." "Okay." She paused. "Dad!" "Yeah, drive safe," he said he would. He put the phone in the cue folder. He drove with both hands on the wheel, the way Carol had always asked him to, because she said he was the best driver she knew, and she didn't want anything to happen to the best driver she knew. And he had spent 21 years of marriage, doing it purely for her, and 3 years of widowhood doing it because the habit was hers. Not his. A small thing she had left in him, that he kept without trying. The highway ran east, and the morning ran with it, and the truck with 211,000 miles and a cracked mirror and a dent in the tailgate from an October afternoon in Fort Worth carried James Calloway toward whatever the next version of things was going to be. The way it had been carrying him since 2003, reliably and without ceremony, the way the best things always do. In the showroom he had left, David Nash's call had come through to the general manager 40 minutes after James walked out the first time. The general manager, a careful man of 51 named Paul, who had worked for David Nash for 11 years and understood precisely the difference between the things David Nash said in a normal voice and the things he said in the other one, had called Brandon into his office. The conversation had been brief and specific. Brandon had come out of it with the particular look of someone who has received an education they did not register for. He had spent the rest of the morning at his desk, not looking at his phone. Tyler spent the afternoon finishing the delivery details for the silver car and then spent an hour after his shift ended, sitting in his car in the parking lot, writing down everything he wanted to remember about the morning. He had grown up being told that the most important lessons don't announce themselves. He filled 2 pages. Then he drove home and called his grandfather. Marcus worked his shift to its end and then sat in his car and looked at his phone for a moment. He had the number. He had written it on the back of his hand, the way soldiers write things they need to keep. He looked at it and thought about his daughter, 6 years old, who had told him last week that she wanted to be an astronaut and a chef and also a police officer, and he had told her that was 3 jobs, and she had told him that was fine. She would do them one at a time. He looked at the number and thought about what it might mean to do work that used what he actually knew and paid accordingly and didn't require him to stand in a showroom watching people decide which version of their lives they could afford. He called the number. It rang once. "This is Calloway." "Mr. Calloway, this is Marcus Webb." From the dealership, a pause in which Marcus heard traffic and the particular quiet of someone who was in a moving vehicle. "Marcus," James Calloway said. "Glad you called. Do you have time this week to sit down?" Marcus looked at his hand where the number was written. "Yes, sir," he said. "I do." "Good," James said. "I'll have my assistant reach out tomorrow." He hung up. Marcus sat with the phone in his hand and looked at the dealership building through his windshield. The showroom lights were on now, against the beginning of the evening. The cars inside gleamed the way they always did. He looked at the building for a moment. The way you look at a place that has just become something different than it was this morning. Not changed in itself, but changed in what it contained, in what it had been the location of. And then he started his car and drove home to his daughter. On Saturday morning, James Calloway drove to Houston. He drove the old truck because it was his truck, and it was how he traveled. He arrived at Sarah's apartment at 10:30 in the morning and knocked on the door, and when she opened it, she was in jeans and a sweater with her hair pulled back, and she looked so specifically like her mother for one fraction of a second that he had to look at her shoes to regroup, and then he looked back up and she was just Sarah, 32 years old. Her own, complete person, looking at him with that particular expression she had when she knew he was about to do something she would not be able to object to effectively. "Dad," she said, "what did you do?" It was not a question. He stepped aside. The silver car was at the curb, morning light on it. 4 doors. Touring package, exactly as described. Sarah looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at her father. Her eyes were doing something that she was not going to be able to stop. "Dad, I know," he said. She put a hand over her mouth, took it away. She was going to say something about it being too much, or about not needing it, or about any of the other things she said when he tried to give her things. All the very reasonable arguments that were also ways of not accepting that he loved her in ways that required action. She was going to say all of that, and then something in her stopped. Maybe it was what he had said on the phone. "Something your mother would have made me buy you 3 years ago." Maybe it was the morning light on the silver paint. Maybe it was just that she was 32 years old and she had lost her mother and kept going, and it was okay to receive something beautiful without arguing with it. She walked to the car. She put both hands on the roof of it. She stood there for a moment. Then she turned back to him. Her face had the laugh in it and the other thing in it, both at once, the way her face had always been capable of holding more than one thing without dropping either. She walked back and hugged him. She was her mother's height and had Carol's particular way of hugging, which was full and genuine and slightly longer than expected, as though the hug itself was the thing, and the ending of it was a choice you made when you were ready. He hugged her back. They stood on the sidewalk in Houston, Texas on a Saturday morning in March, and the city went about its business around them, unhurried and indifferent, the way cities are. And the silver car sat at the curb with the morning light, finding it from exactly the right angle. And James Calloway held his daughter and thought about a road that had been long and had not been straight. and it brought him here, to this sidewalk, to this morning, to this particular quality of light. That was the kind that exists nowhere else on earth and does not stay. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Weeks later, Tyler resigned from Riverside Premium Motors. He sent a handwritten note to Rosa on his last day because she had been kind to him in his first week, when she didn't have to be. He thanked her for what she had shown him about how to conduct yourself in a place that does not always make that easy. Rosa kept the note. She put it in her desk drawer. And on the days when the showroom felt like what it sometimes felt like, she opened the drawer and didn't need to read it. Just knew it was there. Weeks later, Brandon Mercer sat in a mandatory training session about customer experience and unconscious bias that the general manager had implemented, company-wide, following a review that Paul had described in his email to the staff as a clarification of our standards going forward. Brandon sat in the second row and did not look at his phone for the entire 90 minutes, which was the first time that had happened in any meeting since he was given his first phone at 13. He listened. He thought about a man in a flannel shirt who had said apology accepted with a quietness that was harder to carry than anger would have been. He thought about what that kind of quietness required of the person who held it. He was 29 years old, and he was beginning to understand, in a specific way that only experience can teach, that the cost of his assumptions was not paid only by the people he aimed them at. Weeks later, Marcus Webb started his new position. He wore his own clothes to work, which was the first day in 4 years. He had not worn a uniform, and the strangeness of that was also the beginning of something. He called his daughter from the parking lot before he went in. She told him she had decided to add veterinarian to the list of future jobs. He told her that was for now. She told him she knew. She was making a spreadsheet. He sat in his car for a moment after he hung up, smiling at nothing in particular. At the morning, at the specific ordinary gift of a 6-year-old making a spreadsheet of the things she intended to become. Then he went inside and started the work. And in Houston, on a Saturday afternoon 2 weeks after her birthday, Sarah Calloway drove the silver car to the cemetery. She did this alone, the way she did some things, the private things, the things that were hers. She parked and walked to her mother's grave and stood there for a while. She stood for a while longer. Then she drove home on the highway with the windows down and the Texas air coming through and the car doing what it was built to do, moving forward, steady, without complaint. And she thought about her father driving his old truck south on this same highway in the other direction. And she thought about her mother. She talked to her the way she talked to her. Not out loud exactly, but not fully inside either. Somewhere in that space between thought and voice, where the most honest conversations happen. She told her about the car. She described it specifically. The color and the interior and the way the morning light had hit it. The Saturday in March. She told her that Dad had done the thing she always knew he would do eventually, which was find the way to say the thing he couldn't say. Who had spent 23 years loving a man who expressed the depth of what he felt through action rather than words, and had understood from the beginning that this was not a limitation but a language. And she thought about how you carry the people you lose, not behind you, not ahead, but inside, in the specific and irreplaceable ways they changed the shape of who you are. The highway ran south. The evening came on slowly the way Texas evenings do, unhurried and enormous, the sky doing everything it does in that light. And Sarah Calloway drove through it in a silver car that her father had bought in a dealership on a Wednesday morning in March, when a young man in a good suit had looked at an old truck and a flannel shirt and made the mistake of believing that what he saw was what there was. It never is. It never is. If this story moves something in you, share it with one person today. Just one. Someone who needs to be reminded that what a person carries has nothing to do with what they're wearing when they carry it. Subscribe to this channel. There's another story ready and waiting, and I promise you it is worth your time. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.